Good evening, everyone. My name is Derek Brown, the Operations Manager here at Bentonville Battlefield, and I'm happy to join you again for Night 2 of Bentonville 156, a Carolinas Campaign virtual event. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Colonel Retired Wade Sokolosky as tonight's speaker. Colonel Sokolosky is a native of Beaufort, North Carolina, and is a graduate of East Carolina University, and is a 25-year veteran of the U.S. Army. Colonel Sokolosky is the co-author of No Such Army Since the Days of Julius Caesar, Sherman's Carolinas Campaign from Fayetteville to Averasboro, March 1865, and To Prepare for Sherman's Coming, the Battle of Wyse Fort, March 1865. Wade is also the author of Final Roll Call, Confederate Losses During the Carolinas Campaign. His latest research focuses on Confederate hospitals in North Carolina during the Civil War and Sherman's march through South Carolina. Wade is the recipient of the Raleigh Civil War Roundtable's T. Harry Gatton Award for his important efforts to study, preserve, and to share Civil War heritage of his native North Carolina. Additionally, he is a tour guide with the Friends of Bentonville Battlefield and is a member of the Brunswick County Civil War Roundtable Advisory Council. Besides being a prolific Carolinas Campaign researcher and writer, Wade has been a longtime supporter of the Friends of Bentonville Battlefield and Bentonville Battlefield State Historic Site. Tonight, he'll be double dipping, first talking about the Battle of Wyse Fort and the Federals coming up from the coast, and then after a short intermission, he will shift to the Battle of Averasboro, the first major Confederate attempt to check Sherman's march into eastern North Carolina. Thank you, Wade, for agreeing to take part in this and for your continued support of Bentonville Battlefield.
All right, thank you, Derek, for the nice introduction, and good evening, everyone, and thanks for your support of the Bentonville State Historic Site for tuning in here tonight's briefing. I'm going to pause real quick here and get my slide up and running. Okay, folks, as Derek mentioned, tonight I'm talking about the Battle of Wyse Forks, which occurred in March of 1865, which is over towards Kinston, North Carolina, for those of you not familiar with where the battle is located at. But I typically like to start my story off from the battle with Sergeant William Truesdale from Tennessee. Truesdale, on the evening of January 27th, boarded a train in Tupelo, Mississippi, along with his comrades from the Army of Tennessee. And on the morning of March 10th, 1865, Sergeant Truesdale would jump off the train in Kinston, North Carolina. Now, that's a long ways from Tupelo, Mississippi. But his journey to the Carolinas was part of a much bigger event that was happening here in regards to Sherman's campaign here. Now, sadly for Sergeant Truesdale, that would be the last morning on Earth he would ever live. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, he was engaged in the battlefield out by Highway 70 between New Bern and Kinston, and Truesdale was killed instantly, shot through the neck. And unfortunately, his two brothers that were there on the battlefield with him that day were unable to recover Sergeant Truesdale, as that afternoon, General Bragg had ordered a retreat back towards Goldsboro. Now, Truesdale's story is somewhat ironic, is like the battle itself here in North Carolina. It's been often neglected or somewhat forgotten about by historians. But fortunately, starting in 1995 with Dr. Bradley's book, Last Stand in the Carolinas, he introduced the battle. And from that point on, there's been much more work, historical research into the battlefield, into the battle itself. And tonight, I hope to share with you. But before I leave Sergeant Truesdale, just know that unfortunately for him, his family, Sergeant Truesdale still rests somewhere out on that battlefield today in an unmarked grave. Now, the Battle of Wyse Fork, which you see depicted on the map here in the number 1 in the circle, was the first of 4 significant battles fought here in North Carolina during a very brief 2-week period in March of 1865. I like to call it 2 weeks of fury here in the old North State. But you see Wyse Fork is the first one, followed by Monroe's Crossroads, which was the big cavalry battle on modern day Fort Bragg, then Averasboro, and then number 4 is Bentonville. And notice how all the arrows kind of point to number 4. And I like to say, all roads lead to Bentonville at this time. Now, why all this activity in the state of North Carolina? Has to do with this gentleman right here, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman, who on Christmas of 1864 presented the city of Savannah, Georgia to President Abraham Lincoln as a Christmas gift. Now, a very simple question to ask here now to speed things up is what to do with an army of 60,000 men. Sherman's boss, Ulysses S. Grant, wanted Sherman moved by ship up the coast to Richmond, where 60,000 men would very quickly turn the tide in that knockdown, drag-out trench warfare with Robert E. Lee around Petersburg and Richmond. But there simply wasn't enough maritime vessels, whether Navy or contracted by Quartermaster General Meigs, to do that in a timely manner. So it kind of played right into Sherman's hands. He recommended to the boss that let me march my army north to Virginia, and at the same time I'll destroy everything of military value to the Confederacy in the Carolinas, just exactly what he did on the march to sea from Atlanta to Savannah, as well as demonstrate to the Southern population of the outcome of this war is pretty much inevitable. Now, when Sherman sat down at his headquarters in Savannah from the John Green House, where he's planning the concept for his campaign, Sherman put his finger on the map of Goldsboro, North Carolina, where that blue star is in the right-hand corner of the map. Keep in mind, though, that when Sherman's planning this campaign in January, he's actually headed to Virginia. Now, we know with hindsight, things kind of go differently after the Battle of Bentonville. He reaches Goldsboro, but instead of continuing north towards Virginia, he will hang a left towards Raleigh and ultimately the big surrender at the Bennett Place. Now, Sherman sees Goldsboro as nothing but an intermediate objective. He needs it because he needs to resupply his army before continuing that final leg to Virginia. Goldsboro is about 450 miles as the crow flies from Savannah. The campaign has been conducted in the wintertime through swamps and low country, about 9 rivers he crosses. So by the time his troops reached eastern North Carolina, they knew they will definitely need a little bit of refitting and rearming before continuing this. But when looking at this slide, I look at it in 3 phases, and each one of these phases has an objective and then some feints, as I call them, to deceive the Confederates as he continues his march. If you follow up from Savannah, you see the dark shaded gray area where ultimately his army marched, but that first objective is Columbia. But notice there's a star off to Augusta and Charleston, where parts of the army will feint towards these directions to keep the Confederates off balance and not understand truly what his real objective is. Now, in Sherman's mind, it is. And then ultimately it moves to the Fayetteville area and then to Goldsboro. Now, when Sherman put his finger on the map and said Goldsboro, he told his chief quartermaster, Langdon Easton, and commissary officer, Amos Beckwith, along with his civilian railroad engineer, Colonel W.W. Wright. Now, he told these 3 gentlemen, you're not going on this campaign with me. I want you to get on a boat at Hilton Head, South Carolina, go up the coast to Morehead City, and begin getting the railroad prepared, and meet me in Goldsboro mid-March to refit and rearm my army. Now, the reason Sherman selected Goldsboro, because there was 2 railroads at the time that linked Goldsboro to the coast. The primary one down there, Wilmington, which was the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad, which is the railroad in the background of that photograph in the top right. And then from Morehead City to Goldsboro was the Atlantic and North Carolina Railroad. Now, at the time, the problem with these railroads, from a Union planning perspective for a campaign, the vast majority of it was controlled by the Confederates. If we look at the Wilmington Railroad, the Wilmington and Weldon running north up from Wilmington to Goldsboro, you notice it's all red. It's controlled by the Confederates. But oh, by the way, if you want to use the port of Wilmington and the railroad going north from it, you first have to take out that red star, which happens to be Fort Fisher. Now, the other railroad, the Atlantic in North Carolina, from 1862, the Union forces, Brigadier General Ambrose Burnside at the time, his expedition, he captured New Bern and Beaufort and Morehead City along with the railroad and port. Well, the railroad was a functioning railroad up to that time in 1865. to about 9 miles west of New Bern along Bachelor's Creek, which is essentially at the time the western perimeter, the western extent of New Bern's outer perimeter of defenses. Now you notice that highlighted area on that railroad there in yellow, because after Burnside's expedition in the interwar years there in the middle part of the war, the Confederates pulled up all the railroad iron. Now the railroad bed is there, but there's no ties and no iron. So for about 17 miles of that railroad, the Union engineers, and that's why W.W. Wright was sent up north to Morehead City, that part of the railroad has to be repaired. Now beyond that stretch, which is essentially from Kinston to Goldsboro, is just like the Wilmington and Weldon, it's controlled by the Confederates. Now when Sherman took Savannah, there's a series of actions and reactions that are important for me to talk about very briefly before we get into the battle. If you look down at Savannah, right above Sherman's pretty little face there, there's a blue star with the number 1 in it. All right, when Grant approved his plan to march north, Grant immediately starts 2 separate major events to support Sherman move up into the Carolinas. The first one will occur at Fort Fisher. Like I said, if you want to use the Wilmington Railroad in that port, you first got to take Fort Fisher, and that's why you see a blue star there. And let's just say Sherman's not going to send General Butler back to do it. He's going to send Alfred Terry and Admiral Porter this time, who make one heck of a joint combination. And as you know, by mid-January, they will capture that. The other piece that impacts Wyse's fort, up in the top left-hand corner there, you see the photographs of John M. Schofield and Thomas Marr. Now, Grant will order the movement of these forces from Tennessee towards the Carolinas, and that's why you see a star at Morehead City as well as there at Fort Fisher. Grant's intent is to reinforce those forces already operating with Alfred Terry and those along the coast already with Schofield's 23rd Corps. And General Marr is actually coming forward with the Provisional soldiers, which make up a big part of the Union order battle at Wyse's Fork. Your Provisional soldiers, as Peavies as they like to call themselves in their letters and such, Provisional soldiers were essentially, these were replacement soldiers for Sherman's army, raw recruits, or they could have been, they may have been wounded during the Battle of Atlanta, and now they're finally healthy again and they're returning to the army. Or they could have been at the conclusion of the Atlanta campaign, they may have re-enlisted for a couple more years, but as a bonus, they were allowed to go back home to Ohio or Indiana for a little bit of leave. Now they're trying to catch up and return to Sherman's army, which will be scheduled for Goldsboro once he reaches there. Now, the other big reaction from the Confederate perspective, because of the fall of Savannah, if you look all the way over to the left side of the map where the red star is in Tupelo, between Tupelo and Corinth, Mississippi, Confederate President Jefferson Davis orders the transfer of a major part of what's left of the Army of Tennessee, and they're going to begin that long railroad movement through the Deep South and up into Carolinas. And that's where you see Sergeant William Truesdale's picture there on the top of the map there, vicinity of Alabama. Now, once Grant approved Sherman's plan, as I said, he immediately made efforts with Schofield and also with Terry. But after Terry and Porter captured Fort Fisher on January 15th, about 2 weeks later, on January 27th, General Grant will show up off the mouth of the Cape Fear River with General Schofield, who's arrived now, and their intent is to discuss with General Terry and Admiral Porter the follow-on missions now for the capture of Wilmington. Of course, they got to take Fort Anderson and work their way up the Cape Fear River, but that discussion occurs on January 27th, and as Grant is returning north to Virginia, up the coast at Morehead City, he slides into the port there on the morning of January 29th for a unannounced visit with Brigadier General Ennis Palmer. Palmer commands the District of Beaufort within the Department of North Carolina. It is essentially about 10 to 12,000 soldiers These are the soldiers that are at Morehead City, New Bern, Elizabeth City, Roanoke Island, Beaufort. Like I said, essentially about 12,000 soldiers. Now, what Grant tells Palmer on this visit that day is, I need you to start moving west from New Bern and get that railroad fixed. Remember the yellow part of the map that I showed you earlier. Now, remember this date of January 29th, because on February 25th, General Schofield is going to summon a meeting with General Palmer down at Wilmington now. Wilmington has fallen, but unfortunately for the Union forces, they discover that Major General Robert Hoke, who led the final evacuation from Wilmington, pretty much destroyed the Northeast Cape Fear River Railroad trestle. He left no rolling stock, locomotive, flat car, box car, and pretty much did a darn good job of making sure that the Union forces could not fall in on the Wilmington-Weldon Railroad and immediately start using it. Now, this started somewhat of a crisis in Schofield's head because he knows Sherman's directives were meet me in Goldsboro mid-March. Well, we're looking at almost the end of February, and guess what? Schofield learns that the railroad has not moved 1 inch west of New Bern, as General Grant had ordered Palmer to do the month prior. That, along with the condition of the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad at Wilmington, its non-functionality, you can see where Schofield is kind of nervous as a cat, because he knows by reading the newspapers by now, Columbia, South Carolina has fallen, and Sherman is very quickly approaching the North Carolina line. During this time, Schofield summons Palmer down there. He knows the answer to his questions he's going to ask. He's already got permission from General Grant to relieve Palmer of his command and replace him with whoever he wishes, and that is one of his trusted division commanders from the 23rd Corps, Jacob D. Cox. But he also had permission to fire General Marr as well, who happened to lose his troops on the way from Tennessee to the coast before arriving down here in North Carolina. Now, Schofield's orders are pretty succinct to General Cox, but I want you to look at those. And there's nothing in Schofield's orders that talk about finding, defeating, or destroying Confederate forces in eastern North Carolina. It's all about logistics. It's all about engineering. And that is Cox's job, is to get that railroad going so they can open up the supply line from Morehead City and New Bern to Goldsboro before Sherman gets there. Now, Cox will bring into the battle, his order of battle essentially for Wyse's Fork is roughly 13,000 men. Now, you see there the 2 District of Beaufort divisions, General Palmer. Schofield did let Palmer stay in command, but he's now working for Cox, and that's really a wise decision because this is Palmer's district. He understands the nuances of it, and he's much better for helping Cox to get things in order. But essentially, those 12,000 soldiers that were stationed in eastern North Carolina, Cox will very quickly relocate a lot of them towards New Bern, and he creates these temporary divisions, the 1st and 2nd District of Beaufort. Now, if you look at Cox's order of battle, probably his most veteran soldiers will come from Thomas Ruger's division from the 23rd Corps, which is now arriving from Tennessee at the port of Morehead City. And unfortunately for Cox, during this upcoming campaign that he's going to launch, he only has 1 regiment of cavalry. And understand that cavalry is the eyes and ears of a commander, and we'll see how that goes for Cox here later on. Now, all this activity in eastern North Carolina, in the Carolinas in general, the fall of Columbia, the capture of Wilmington, Confederate President Jefferson Davis is obviously having a bad month of February, and he's under a lot of pressure to do something about it. And upon the recommendation of Robert E. Lee, Joseph Eggleston Johnston is brought out of semi-retirement to head up operations here in North Carolina. You can see Lee's guidance to him: concentrate and turn back Sherman. Now, initially, Johnston's kind of hesitant about this. Am I being set up? But eventually, through some conversations with some of his political connections in Richmond, it kind of soothes his worries, and he kind of takes on it. But what's important about initially this is Lee's order does not grant Joseph Johnston command of the Department of North Carolina. Now, why is this significant? Because Robert Hoke's division, which was loaned from the Army of Northern Virginia to Bragg to help defend Wilmington and Fort Fisher, constitutes about 25% of Johnston's ultimate combat power at Bentonville, almost 5,000 men. Also, it violates a very proven principle of war: unity of command. Essentially, there can be one guy in charge. And Johnston tells Lee this: I can't be asking Lee, let me borrow Hoke's division. Lee very quickly fragos that initial order and assigns pretty much Johnston in charge of everybody down here in North Carolina, except that they work for the commissary of quartermaster department, because he doesn't want Johnston taking his supplies from the Army of Northern Virginia. But essentially, General Bragg will write President Davis, please relieve me of this embarrassing situation. And unfortunately or fortunately, ever how you want to look at it, Davis doesn't do anything. So Bragg will remain in control of the Department of North Carolina, at least through the first day of Bentonville. Now, because of Sherman's movement up through the Carolinas, you see this concentration here. The red star is Smithfield, where Johnston is concentrating the Army of Tennessee or any other forces he can gather. Bragg's hanging out in Goldsboro, keeping an eye on the forces coming out of New Bern and Wilmington, as well as Hardee, who's continually shadowing Sherman up through into North Carolina. Now, what Palmer failed to do in about a month, within 72 hours upon arriving in New Bern, General Cox has this Union force on the move. And they're essentially going to move down that railroad or a couple of secondary roads north or south of it, because they're focused on the railroad and its repair. Now, over towards the west at Kinston, which happens to be the local command there of John N. Whitford, a New Bern native, who commands the forces there at the post at Kinston. Now, according to General Cox and General Palmer, all that's there at Kinston is young boys and old men, forces of questionable reliability. And that's the impression that they have of the enemy as they move west out of New Bern, but that will very quickly change. The Confederate response to Cox's movement, Joseph Johnston now, think from an operational perspective, much larger. He's got to worry about 60,000 coming up with Sherman, and ultimately what's coming up from Wilmington and New Bern, another 30,000 if you combine both of them. And he realizes he has to prevent them. So in a very risky move, he suggests that that the Confederates do something to stop that element coming out. Now, the Confederates at this time are very aware of Cox's movement, as well as the buildup there at Morehead and New Bern. The lady in the top right corner, Miss Emmeline Piggott, is one of North Carolina's most noted female Confederate spies. She is from Morehead City, and it's during this time that she is captured and held by the Union for suspected espionage work on the part. But fortunately, General Bragg, within his department, he has enough spies and eyes on the enemy. He's aware, and we begin the setup for the Battle of Wyse's Fort. Now, to reinforce General Bragg at Kinston, he makes the decision to send forward what elements of the Confederate Army of Tennessee that has already arrived from Tupelo, that were kind of hanging out at the Smithfield, North Carolina. And D.H. Hill, who was the senior officer at the time, Johnston orders Hill to move east along the railroad and reinforce General Bragg. Now, you got to understand the history between Bragg and D.H. Hill. They're not sending each other Christmas cards every year, and that's why Johnston sends the message to Hill, I beg you to forget the past for this emergency. And the past that Johnston's referring to is the Battle of Chickamauga. Now, Bragg will bring into the fight at the Battle of Wyse's Fork approximately about 9,000 men, depending on whose beer math you want to follow. You see he has a couple regiments of cavalry, the 6th and the 2nd South Carolina. And the 2nd's really been hanging south down around Wilmington, keeping an eye on Alfred Terry. As before, as I mentioned, General Hoke's division from the Army of Northern Virginia. And here we introduce the North Carolina Junior Reserves. By now, they've been a brigade has been created amongst the 3 regiments and 1 battalion under the command of Brigadier General Lawrence Baker. I mentioned before John Whitford's force, the 67th and 68th North Carolina Infantry Regiments from that area. And then the Army of Tennessee. General D.H. Hill will be the first to arrive with elements from S.D. Lee's Corps. And then starting late on the afternoon of March 9th, Edward Wathall will arrive with forces from A.P. Stewart's Corps from the Army of Tennessee. Now, by March 6th, the Federals are almost to Kinston. If you look at blue star there, that is the series of 2 forks in the road just east of Kinston. That area today, if you travel it, is really Highway 70 as you're heading towards New Bern from a more contemporary perspective. But you see along the Southwest Creek, along the western bank there, on the western side of the map, you see where Robert Hoke's division has arrived, as well as the Junior Reserves. And along this creek, they put in the initial defense. So in a matter of days, what Cox thought was only old men and young boys, now you have a veteran division, almost 5,000 men from the Army of Northern Virginia that has arrived. Now, a key part in that little blow-up circle there is Darius Couch, and oftentimes Couch's movement north towards Kinston is forgotten about on a lot of the maps. They pick up Alfred Terry moving north along the Wilmington and Weldon, but this is a significant force, folks. It's 2 divisions of the 23rd Corps. So the whole time Braxton Bragg is fighting the 3-day fight at the Battle of Wyse's Fork, the 2nd South Carolina Cavalry is doing a daggone good job of keeping track of Couch's movement, and Bragg is aware just how close they're getting as each day passes. By March 7th, we got initial skirmishing along the Southwest Creek, that bridge there along the Dover Road, or Highway 70 as I like to call it today. But it's also this time one of the first Union casualties during the battle is Sergeant Isaac Parker from the 132nd New York. What's interesting about the 132nd is they have several companies of Native Americans, in particular Iroquois or Tuscarora, which, as you know, if your North Carolina history, originates just west from New Bern, North Carolina. Now, by the evening of March 7th, the Confederates have successfully held off these probes. Those 3 stars that you see each represent either a road bridge or a railroad bridge across Southwest Creek, and you can see how the Confederate defenses are arrayed, focused on defending them. Now, if the Federals just take one of those bridges and are able to put forces on the opposite bank, they would very quickly turn the Confederate defenders along Southwest Creek and immediately have them go back towards Kinston several miles further to the west. Now, by the evening of March 7th, if you look at how the Federals are arrayed on the battlefield, as I circled them with my map, with my mouse here, this is a Union brigade. That is a little more than a mile from the rest of his division, Carter's division. It's sticking out like a sore thumb. And then several miles to the north, we have the same scenario with Harlan's brigade. It's more than a mile from the rest of its division as well. Now, the only thing connecting these 2 brigades is a thin skirmish line, which further depletes rifles from the fighting units here as they man here. Now, you got to ask yourself the question, where's General Cox at this time? You don't see his name anywhere on this map. Why? Because he's about 10 to 15 miles back towards New Bern, wrestling with problems with logistics, the railroad that's still not been completely repaired. so they can utilize it. So by the time the brigades and 2 divisions that arrive here, they're starting to run out of food, and they're having to make the long journey back with their railroad, with their wagons, to resupply. So his focus is in the rear and not on the enemy, folks, because once again, remember, he thinks it's just of questionable reliability at Kinston. He's unaware that Robert Hoke's division is arrived, and guess who's showing up now from Smithfield on the night of March 7th? The Army of Tennessee, which is more veteran soldiers. And by the time the evening is set, you see this dangerous array, not very good tactically here, and General Robert Hoke picks up on this. And at the Sam Howard House, which was General Bragg's headquarters that evening, General Bragg will have his one and only council of war during this entire 3-day battle. And all the big guys are there: Hoke, Hill, Lawrence Baker, Johnson Haygood from South Carolina. They're all there. And it's at this point that Hoke makes the recommendation, let me move my army around and I will attack this lone brigade in the flank, which is essentially what you see happen on the early morning of March 8th. Notice here at the top left-hand corner how Hoke's division will begin an all-night march, and Hill's Army of Tennessee have replaced them in the trenches. And the plan is early morning of March 8th, Hill's soldiers are to keep up the firing and the cannons and small arms fire to keep the attention of the skirmish line here, to think that really nothing's happening other than a continuation from the day before. The Federals are unaware that almost 5,000 veteran soldiers has pretty much moved around the entire flank, and around 11 o'clock that morning will launch a devastating attack that within 30 minutes, an entire Union brigade, more than 900 soldiers, are captured alone, not counting those wounded or killed. Now, how do they pull that move off? Down by this red star here, research has shown there's a couple companies from the 12th New York and a detachment from the 23rd New York Cavalry. You look at those records, over 60 of these soldiers are captured on March 8th. Only one guy, Lieutenant Pittman, is killed. Now you have to ask your question, how does 60 cavalrymen get captured by infantry who make a living walking? Well, we know from some of the accounts from the junior reserves, they mentioned how they were guarding these prisoners later on that day, and some of them were definitely must have got into some apple brandy the night before. But essentially what has fallen here is Cox, who's still not on the battlefield, throughout the morning he will get these intelligence updates that there's a Confederate force moving on your flank, and he dismisses them because he knows he has mounted forces out here. He is unaware that they've been totally they failed the job and they've been captured. So like I said, upon hearing Hoke's attack here on the Lone Brigade, Hill's forces will come across the creek, and it is very quickly in this Wyse they capture the forces here. Up here in the north, the junior reserves and the North Carolina Red Infantry get a little bit of a fight here with the 23rd Massachusetts. But by afternoon, what's happened here is Hoke, by the time like I said, he's dealing with almost 1,000 prisoners alone. So that takes some time. By the time he reorganizes his forces to continue the attack, also at this time, General Bragg sends an order to D.H. Hill, which essentially tells him to disengage from the fight here in the center and to basically do an about face and march back down the Neuse Road towards New Bern to effectively block the escape route of these forces that they had just captured. So essentially, D.H. Hill, the veterans of the Army of the Tennessee, over 1,000 junior reserves, as well as a portion of Haygood's brigade, several thousand soldiers are taken out of the fight, and for the rest of the day, they will not fire any more shots. By that afternoon, before they can really get going, you see General Cox. He realizes what's happening. Ruger's division is rushed forward, and they begin to assemble a defensive trace along here on Wyse's Fork. And by the time Hoke initiates the attack later that afternoon, Ruger's boys have arrived. They're veteran soldiers from Sherman's army from the Atlanta campaign. They immediately start digging in, and that's essentially how it ends that day. A couple quick quotes here from some of the Confederates. I love this one from Samuel C. Kelly, a member of the Pettus's Brigade. They were the easiest Yankees whipped I've ever seen, and well dressed. Now, by March 9th, you see Cox. You know, Cox is a very good general. All right, General Bragg, you fooled me one time. You're not going to get me again. You see, General Bragg is General Cox has essentially assumed the defense here. You see his entrenchments. What this gives General Cox is interior lines, so he can shift forces left to right wherever he ever feels the threat here is. Now, on March 9th, General Hoke was ordered to simply repeat the same thing he did the day before in the South, but to do it here in the North. But essentially, when you read the reports from these commanders here in Cox's corps here, essentially nothing ever really happens on March 9th. So we can assume Hoke realized this was not a very good picture. He very quickly withdraws back to his line, understanding he's not going to attack straight into this defense he has here. Only really significant activity that occurs here. Irvine Walker from the 10th South Carolina. There's a national skirmish line here, fight that runs till about midnight. Colonel Keyes falls into an old privy. It's a great little story as you read, and you'll find it in the book. Now, on the morning of March 10th, General Bragg realizes that time is running out. The 2nd South Carolina Cavalry has been doing a good job of keeping him abreast. He knows that Darius Couch's two more divisions from the 23rd Corps is only about a day's march south of here. And he decides he's got to give one more go of it. And being as creative, or not as creative he really needs to be, General Bragg pretty much repeats the same recipe from March 8th, and Hoke's division will do this flank attack along the Confederate left, where he thinks is the Confederate left. But General Cox picks up on this move. You can see where he weakens the center. He extends his line. So by the time Hoke's division attacks with Colquitt's Georgians and Kirkland's Tar Heels in the lead, they're no longer attacking the end of the line. They're essentially attacking pretty much the center. And as you see the Federal reaction, they will move out and hit the flank of Kirkland's brigade. Private Kell from the 17th North Carolina will write, "This is the worst place that I ever was in my life." Essentially, Colquitt's brigade went forward and was beaten back, but Kirkland's brigade continued to charge and got within probably 50 yards of the main Federal line. But all this artillery was shifted to this location, which is pounding Kirkland's brigade, as well as getting hit in the flank. And at the right opportune time, Robinson's skirmishers launch a counterattack into the right flank of Kirkland's brigade. And by this time, most of these Tar Heels had gone to ground, and it's very quickly a rout, which forces the withdrawal of Hoke's division. Now, luckily for General Hoke here, General Cox thought this was a ruse. He thought the main attack was going to occur in the center where he had weakened his line. So he did not intentionally reinforce success when Major Robbins came forward with those 4 companies. He called them back. Now, because of the situation down here south, General Bragg ordered the Army of Tennessee to attack here to take the pressure off Hoke. And in doing so, they moved forward. But essentially by this time, the Army of Tennessee does not have the numbers. And as you can see, as they approach the Federal line, what they thought was on the flank, now they are very quickly subject to being hit in their flank at the same time. And it's during this time here in Quarles' brigade from Tennessee, where young Sergeant William Truesdale is shot dead instantly in front of the works here. So after they realize the situation here, General Bragg will call off the attack. The Army of Tennessee forces will fall back, and it's during this time that General Bragg essentially orders the abandonment of Kinston as well as the battlefield here, and they will begin their move back towards Goldsboro. Now, because of the confusion, I understand some of these boys, especially from the 23rd Corps, had just fought the Battle of Franklin and Nashville against the Army of Tennessee, and now they have prisoners that are from A.P. Stewart's Corps. They have prisoners from S.D. Lee's Corps. They're somewhat confused, and what Schofield will do is he orders General Cox to maintain his position around the Wyse's Fort community and await the arrival of Darius Couch and 2 more divisions of the 23rd Corps until they kind of figure out what's going. In Schofield's mind, it's almost like the Confederates have concentrated right there at Kinston and not over towards Smithfield. It's not until March 14th that the Federals will get across the bridge into Kinston, and ultimately where they will continue to struggle to get the railroad completed up to Kinston. Now, in the aftermath of the battle, you can see the Union losses there. The majority of those losses come from the brigade, Upham's brigade, that was captured on March 8th. The Confederate losses, you see quite a number there, 716. Now, although Cox will report, that Schofield will report that over 1,500 Confederates were captured, a more realistic number based upon the research I've done, allowing a very generous plus or minus factor addition there. It's right around 716 individuals from the Confederate forces that fought there. The vast majority of them came out of Kirkland's brigade and Hoke's division on March 10th, either wounded or missing from the battle. Now, in the aftermath, when General Bragg gives up Kinston, the Army of Tennessee and Hoke's division and the rest of the crew will now begin their movement back towards Goldsboro. For the Federals, none of the Federals that fight here, and ultimately they will fight at the Battle of Bentonville a week later almost, no more than a week later. For the Federals there, they're not fighting anyone. They're fighting the railroad. They're repairing bridges over the Neuse River. They have enough on their mind as they're struggling to get the supplies to Goldsboro before Sherman gets there. Now, by March 23rd, the railroad bridge across the Neuse River is finally open, is for travel. But guess who's arrived at Goldsboro ahead of the forces coming from New Bern? Sherman's already there. The Battle of Bentonville has already taken place, and Sherman's already awaiting them there in Goldsboro.